So Moses was born during a massacre of the innocents, and so Jesus was born during a massacre of the innocents. Moses the Christ was born during a massacre of the innocents. The Pharaoh is going to kill all those kids, and then Jesus the Christ is going to be born during a massacre of the innocents when Herod the king kills all those kids. So it kind of looks like to me that Matthew in the New Testament had cooked up a new literary device in order to connect the Jesus of the Christ to Moses of the Christ, just like Jesus was going to be the brand new Moses. I am the law of Moses. I am the law of Moses. What did he say? What did he just say? He says he's the law of Moses? Well, then that means he must have read the 10 Commandments. What the hell is his problem? The massacre of the Jewish boys was an event that took place during the reign of Seti the First. Pharaoh Seti, or so they say. It could have been Pharaoh Ramses II, Pharaoh Ramses II, or Pharaoh Horemheb. It could have been Horemheb, and it could have been Thutmose the Third, or Akhenaten, or most controversially, maybe it was actually Pharaoh Dudimose II. You think it was Dudimose? He was the Pharaoh during the Exodus of Moses? No, I don't. It was probably Pharaoh King Merenptah. Maybe it was Pharaoh King Merenptah. Maybe Jehoshaphat. The Old Testament only says that it was Pharaoh who ordered the massacre of the innocent Hebrew boys, the Jewish boys. It was just Pharaoh. Oh, who's doing that? Pharaoh. Well, Joseph knew Pharaoh, and then so did Abraham. All of these characters in the Bible, why do they know Pharaoh like he's the guy next door? And then we went to Pharaoh, borrowed a cup of sugar. Pharaoh Seti. So we're going with Pharaoh Seti, because it was Ramses as Moses was a baby, and then the next Pharaoh would be Ramses, so it'd be Seti, right? So Pharaoh Seti, the Pharaoh of the oppression, Pharaoh Seti, or Ramses, or Dudimose, feared that the growing number of Jews would lead to an uprising against his empire. Pharaoh Seti ordered his army to march on the homes of the Hebrews for the troops to take the Hebrew baby boys, the Jewish boys, and just chuck them into the Nile River where they'll drown and die. And then Moses' mother is going to put him into a basket, put him into the Nile River and pray. And then guess what? Her prayers were answered. The daughter of the Pharaoh is going to find him and adopt him, and that's going to save Moses' life. Now, Joseph's brothers, they sold him into slavery. Joseph became an advisor to Pharaoh. I mean, my God, he went from slave to the advisor to Pharaoh in 4.3 seconds. Around year 9 of his reign, Seti appointed his son Ramses II as the crown prince and his chosen successor. Because Matthew used the massacre of the innocent story of Herod, similar to how Moses was born, this made it seem like Jesus Christ, this damn story, this damn Jesus the Christ story, it made it sound like it was a bunch of bullshit. Or at least so I thought. And then Israel killed 200,000 babies in Palestine. And they won't fucking stop. They won't stop. Every fucking day there's 10, 20, 30, 50 more Palestinians getting killed. We're bombing churches. We're bombing schools. And we're bombing every UN refugee camp that we could possibly find. Their prime minister has court issues. Israel wants to take all of Palestine. They don't respect a two-state solution. 2,000 years ago, Israel was promised by God to the Hebrews, but the Palestinians have been living on it for the past 1,000 years. America, my country, killed 1,000. No, they killed 1 million Iraqis. Why did all those Iraqi people deserve to die? Why did all those innocents deserve to die? Well, 9/11. Saudi Arabia killed 3,000 of our citizens in New York in 2001. We were too scared to invade Saudi Arabia, so we invaded Afghanistan and then we invaded Iraq. We picked on two nations who had nothing to do with 9/11. So we did it for empire's sake. We did it for revenge's sake. We did it for fuck's sake. The massacre of the innocents in Gaza, West Bank, Palestine, officially it's 48,000, but it's probably 200,000. That's a guesstimation with the starvation and the disease. And it's all children. It's old and women and children. It's just a war on babies. It's a war on children. Kill all the kids. 2 million people are in Palestine. 2 million have been displaced. That means everybody in Palestine has had to at least move once or twice or 3 or 4 times. Terrorism, the definition, since America's had this war on terrorism for what, 2002, for about 22 years now. The definition of terrorism is when you attack civilians for political purposes. The attacking of civilians for political purposes, well, that's terrorism. And what's happening in Palestine today, 2024, is terrorism as well. Bethlehem is in Palestine. O little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. O little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. That means the Palestinians are literally Jesus Christ. They are literally baby Jesuses. When Moses was born out of the massacre of the innocents, and then Jesus was born out of the massacre of the innocents, it makes me wonder, who is the new Jesus? Who is the new Moses being born right now? According to the Torah, Exodus 2, despite a decree calling for the death of newborn Jewish boys, Moses is going to survive. And that's because the midwives, let's read a little bit of the Bible. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of was Shiphrah, and the other was Puah. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stools, if it's a son, then you shall kill him. But if it's a daughter, then she shall live. The midwives feared God, did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, and saved the male children alive. The king of Egypt called for the midwives and said, Why have you not killed these boys? And the midwives said to the Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are lively and they give birth before the midwives even come to them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was because the midwives feared God that he provided households for them. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. So he ordered that to everybody. And then Pharaoh's going to, Moses is put in a basket. The daughter of Pharaoh picks him up. And then Moses is going to kill an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew, one of the slave masters, one of the oppressors, one of the overseers, is sitting there beating up a Hebrew, and he saves him. But he kills the Egyptian. Pharaoh wants his head on a plate, and then he takes off. And then later on, Moses is going to marry a woman named Zipporah, a Midianite. Moses married a Midianite. You know how ridiculous that is. Didn't he commit genocide against the Midianites? So he married a Midianite and then committed genocide against the Midianites. That is not a good stranger. You should not have allowed Moses to go into your lands, Midianites. That was poo-poo on the Midianites. According to the Torah, despite a decree calling for the death of newborn Jewish boys, Moses survived. Pharaoh's daughter had rescued him, named him Moses, and raised him as her own. In popular culture, thanks to the Cecil B. DeMille's film, The Ten Commandments, Moses is portrayed as growing up as an Egyptian prince and rivaling his contemporary, the next Egyptian pharaoh. Wasn't there that one movie, Moses, Christian Bale? I kind of want to see it now. The Torah's narrative is less dramatic, although it does recount that as a young man, Moses kills an Egyptian taskmaster, overseer, oppressor, and that's the plot twist that forces his exile. Decades later, Moses is going to return to Egypt because God commanded him to, and then he confronts Pharaoh, and then that ultimately leads the Jewish people to freedom, because you got the 10 plagues, and then one of the last plagues is kill all the firstborn children of the Hebrews. Pharaoh Seti I said to Moses on why he massacred the Hebrew boys during the time of Moses' birth. Pharaoh Seti said, "Oh, my son, they were only slaves. Oh, my son, they were just slaves. My son, they were slaves. So they didn't fucking matter. Holy shit. And my son Seti is not Moses' father. Seti is not Moses' father. You are not my father, Luke. Luke, I am your father. Donald Trump visited Lolita Island of Epstein 7 times. Did he go there to fucking rape the children? Who knows? Epstein and Donald were really, really good friends. Donald knew Epstein liked them young. He knew that. And then he also was rooting for Epstein. And then there's that lawsuit which specifically said Epstein and Donald had raped that 13-year-old together. And then that lawsuit just disappeared altogether. I mean, that's some pedophile shit. That's some child molesting shit, child raping shit. 7 times Donald Trump flew to Epstein Rape Children Island. What were you doing there? I guess he was going there to play some foosball. I'm sure he wasn't. The Pharaoh of Egypt ordered all the Jewish Hebrew boys under 2 years of age killed, murdered, dashed upon the stone. Moses was put into a floating basket. Pharaoh's daughter found him, adopted him. When he was the prince of Egypt, Moses had a dream of the massacre, seeing his mother sailing him away in a basket in the Nile River. Then he woke up from it and found a hieroglyph about the massacre. Moses then knew he was Hebrew, and Moses wanted to know from Seti why he did this. Seti tried to justify his actions, saying they were just slaves and that sacrifices needed to be made in order to protect his empire. In order to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. Then Moses had ran away from him. Genesis 47:11, it clearly states that Joseph had become vizier of Egypt. He settled his father Jacob and his brothers, giving them land holdings in Egypt in the best part of the country, the region of Ramses. But that's an anachronism, they say. That's an amore. That's an amore. King Herod's massacre of the innocents when Jesus was born. When Jesus was born, King Herod ordered all the boys under 2 years old killed in Bethlehem. Now, some people say Bethlehem was really tiny, so that's about 6, maybe 10, 20, kids. But others say it was about 48,000, which is the official kill number in Palestine. Others say 180,000. I've even heard 300,000 killed so far. So America and Israel's war in Palestine, the war against brown-skinned Muslim children, the numbers are identical. The numbers are identical with the slaughter of the innocents, with the massacre of the innocents in Matthew when Jesus was born. It's a clear massacre of the innocents. The exact same numbers. Israel and Netanyahu's current massacre of the innocents. 1 million were killed in Iraq. 1,033,000. Some people say 600,000 by Lancet. 210 IBC Iraqi body count. 100,000 civilians killed. 500,000 people have been killed in the Ukraine-Russian war. 31,000 civilians, says Zelensky. 3.5 million Americans die each year. 1% of the total. The Gospel of Matthew records the event in this manner. Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry, and he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all its districts from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. Then it was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying that a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, in a great mourning, Rachel, weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more. The chosen killed Ramah, doubting Thomas's wife to be. Jesus just straight up said it's not her time to be saved, straight to Thomas's face, knowing that Jesus can bring Lazarus and others back to life, plus other magical miracle tricks. Genesis 12:10-20 says that Abraham moved to Egypt to escape a period of famine in Canaan. He's worried that the Pharaoh will kill him, take away his wife, Sarai. So Abram says, just say that you're my sister. Eventually they're summoned to meet the Pharaoh. God sends plagues against the Pharaoh because of his intention to marry Sarah, which doesn't make sense because he thought it was his sister, so he didn't even know. But after he discovers that Sarah is Abraham's wife, he releases, and he's Abraham, he changed his name from Abram to Abraham. That's not much of a change, and maybe it just got a better cadence to it. Abraham. He releases her, orders Abraham to take his belongings and return to Canaan. The Pharaoh, they say, was Sanakite, while some others say it was Tutus. Now, Egyptologist David Rohl, he argued that this Pharaoh was Neb-Khalre Keti IV. That's what David Rohl says, R-O-H-L, an Egyptologist. King Herod, upon becoming king, his first order of business was to purge his Hasmonean predecessors. He had Mattathias, Antigonus, executed because he saw him as a threat. He had the elderly John Hyrcanus II strangled over an alleged plot to have him overthrown. King Herod was a piece of shit. The Romans were terrible fucking people, and they ruled through fear and violence and threat, cruelty and blood shed. King Herod also had his brother-in-law, who was the high priest, drowned in his swimming pool because he thought the Jews would want him to be their ruler instead of him. Out of paranoia, he had his mother-in-law executed, and then later his second wife, Miriam, killed. And then 3 of his sons through that marriage were also murdered to top things off. Herod had become more unhinged in his later years. In the last few years of his life, he had 300 military leaders executed. Then a little bit later, some Pharisees had prophesied that his kingdom would not fall to his heirs. So he rounded up the Pharisees and had them killed too. With prophecies already circulating within his kingdom, is it really any wonder that Herod wanted to kill the baby Jesus when the Magi had revealed the new king of the Jews had been born? Herod also imprisoned the leading figures of Palestine in the Hippodrome, intending to have them all killed at the time of his own death in order to ensure a grand mourning. According to the Pentagon documents leaked in the spring, Russia had suffered 189,500 to 223,000 casualties, including up to 43,000 killed in action. One document said that as of February, Ukraine had suffered 124,500 to 131,000 casualties. Mariupol was tens of thousands killed there, with as many as 17,500 killed in action, while several U.S. officials and one former senior Ukrainian official said about 70,000 Ukrainian soldiers had died in the conflict so far. Other American officials said the number could be lower. Now, who is the new Moses? Who's the new Jesus? We got a massacre of the innocents happening right now before our eyes. Who was the new Moses that came out of Iraq? Who is the new Jesus that's going to come out of Palestine, out of Bethlehem? Literally, we're doing the same shit to Bethlehem today. When I think, well, shit, why would Matthew make up a lie about just massacring a bunch of innocents in Bethlehem? Well, shit, why is Israel and America killing a bunch of innocents in Bethlehem today? Why? There was that 14-year-old rapper who should be something 24 or something today, that MC Abdul. Is that the new Jesus, that MC Abdul? What about that UFC champion? He's Palestinian too, Bilal Muhammad. You got the Olympics happening right now. They're diplomats, right? They're diplomats. So you have a bunch of Palestinians who are Olympians. Moses was married to Zipporah, a Midianite. After the birth of the Messiah, a second angelic dream warns Joseph to flee to Egypt with Mary and the Christ child as King Herod orders a slaughter. The killing of the firstborn sons in Egypt was not limited or specified to be that of babies. Firstborns would have been of every age. King Herod would have come out of his depression. He would build. Then he would hear of another rumor, and that person was supposed to take over his kingdom. He would kill that person. Then he would go into another depression. After a while, he would come out of this depression, and he would build. And the cycle repeated itself a whole bunch of times. So kill the person and then build some stuff. Kill the next person, the next Messiah, the next Savior of the people. This cycle repeated itself a number of times, in which numerous people were killed, including one of his 10 wives as well as 3 of his sons. Herod also had 3 of his sons killed. The first 2, Alexander and Aristobulus, the sons of Miriam, were strangled in Sebasti, Samaria in 7 BC and buried at the Alexandrium. The last, only 5 days before Herod's own death, was Antipater, who was buried without ceremony at Hyrcania. Herod the Great became extremely paranoid during the last 4 years of his life. On one occasion, 7 BC, he had 300 military leaders executed. On another, he had a whole bunch of Pharisees executed in the same year. Macrobius, one of the last pagan writers in Rome, in his book Saturnalia, wrote, when it was heard that as part of the slaughter of boys up to 2 years old, Herod, king of the Jews, had ordered his own son to be killed, and the Emperor Augustus, he remarked that it's better to be Herod's pig than it is to be his son. In the early years of his reign, Seti led his army northward to restore Egyptian prestige. This is Pharaoh Seti. which had been partly lost during the troubled years of the late 18th dynasty. He battled in northern Palestine and Syria and fought at least one battle with the Hittite king Muwatallah, said he is the greatest king of the 19th dynasty. The massacre would be mentioned again when, during the reign of Ramses II, Moses returns to Egypt to deliver freedom to his people, to free his people out of bondage. Hey, knock it off. I got 4 more sentences. Knock it off. Moses tells that everybody that's sparky, spunky. He's been sitting still for 2 hours, but apparently he needs to run all over the place right now. After the 9 plagues hits, Moses tells about Sethi's order that killed innocent lives, but just like his father, Ramses II said that they were just slaves. Moses objected that he could not allow this to continue. Then you had 9 plagues hit the land of Egypt, and then repeated refusal by Pharaoh Ramses would not let the Jewish people go. And so he just decided to finish what his father had started. He says, all the firstborn children of the Jewish Hebrews shall die. And this plague let Hebrews eventually, the Jewish people are going to be freed from slavery because of this. Ironically, the massacre was done in order to make sure that the Hebrews wouldn't lead to an uprising, but it was that massacre that actually led Moses to being able to set his people free. And now I'm done. All right, Sparky? Goodness gracious, Sparky. What are we doing here? What are you doing here, huh? Why are you causing so much commotion? Huh? Yeah. Okie dokie.